well, I think it's time to get started, and we'll just welcome anybody else that joins us later on. But Chris Eyler, thank you so much for joining us here from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I think you're up in Seattle, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. Well, the U.S. Chamber's been just great about giving local chambers a lot of information from a federal perspective, and I thought it would just be a great opportunity for you to come in and talk about sort of what's been happening and what you think is going to be going on in the future and how we're going to move ourselves out of all of this.
Great. All right, I will take it from there. If you just put my slides up. As Deanna said, my name is Chris Eyler. I'm the U.S. Chamber's Executive Director for the Northwest region. And this morning, I'm just going to give you a broad overview of what Congress has done so far to provide federal assistance to the ongoing coronavirus crisis, and then just give you a general sense of what we see coming next. The thing I want you to keep in mind is this is by no means the last thing that we expect the federal government to do. We expect that there will be, at a minimum, another Phase 4 bill, as well as additional resources put forward. But for the time being, what I'm going to talk about is what they have done over the past month. Next slide, please.
So, Chris, I'm just going to do a quick check with our folks. Can everybody see these slides?
Yes.
Can you? Okay. So
yep.
Now, okay.
Yes, that's very good.
Excellent. So I'm going to try to figure out. Oh, there we go. Okay.
And the other thing I just want you to keep in mind as I go through these programs, these were not done under the normal course of business for Congress. They moved very quickly. Three very significant bills moved very quickly in under 30 days. The consequence of that is there are a lot of ambiguities in these bills. There are a lot of things that are vague. Part of that was done intentionally so that the administrative agencies that would be putting these programs into place would have as much flexibility as possible to respond to the crisis, to respond to if something was working and something was not. But a lot of it is a reflection of the fact that these bills did not go through the normal rigors that a bill would go through. They moved very quickly, and things just, when things move that quickly, things get overlooked, and there are often holes left unintentionally. So there are going to be a lot of things that we are still trying to work out and get additional guidance from agencies on with respect to how they're implementing them. And this is happening in real time, day to day, hour to hour. We are trying to be as patient as possible with the federal government on this, but we're also trying to feed them as much information about the real world impacts of these programs so that they can get any kind of problems corrected as quickly as possible. So just generally speaking, as I said, Congress passed 3 bills in 30 days. The first bill was largely a supplemental appropriations bill to provide funding to federal agencies to help them respond to the crisis. The second Phase 2 bill was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. What this bill did was require small businesses to provide paid sick and family medical leave, provided additional funding for state Medicaid programs, and provided additional funding for food insecurity programs like WIC and SNAP. I will talk briefly towards the end about the paid sick and FMLA provisions, but most of what I'm going to talk about is the so-called Phase 3 bill. This is what is called the CARES Act. It is a $2 trillion package, which is roughly 10% of US GDP. It provided aid to hospitals, $100 billion to hospitals, $150 billion to state and local governments, as well as it provided for direct payments to individuals. But most of the bill is targeted at the business community, specifically to provide resources so that businesses could continue paying their obligations, and most importantly, continue paying their employees during the duration of the crisis. Just quickly on the payments to individuals. Under the CARES Act, individuals will receive a $1,200 check if they make less than $75,000 a year. For married couples and joint filers, they will receive a $2,400 check if their joint tax return is less than $150,000 per year. There's an additional $500 per child on top of that. Those checks started going out yesterday. The Treasury is issuing those as direct deposits, and they will eventually start issuing physical paper checks to those who don't have direct deposit, but those checks likely will not start going out until next month. And from my understanding, they are prioritizing lower income taxpayers first and getting those payments out. So if you haven't received your check yet, it's probably because they are starting at the low end of the income scale and working their way up. Additionally,
can I interrupt for just a second?
Yes.
There was a question on the call regarding the child care, or the $500 per child. Is that age limitation of 16 years old? And what about college students that are still dependents?
You know, that is the first time I've been asked that. I'll have to look into that.
Okay.
I will check on that.
Excellent. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No. The other thing that the CARES Act did for, actually the Phase 2 and the CARES Act both expanded eligibility for unemployment. The Phase 2 bill lifted most eligibility requirements to obtain unemployment insurance if the unemployment is related to COVID-19. And then the CARES Act came in, and the federal government is providing an additional $600 per week on top of the state benefit. That right now is authorized and funded through July 31st. Once an individual can return to work, that expanded benefit will expire. So if if a business has laid off or furloughed their employees, and then they are now reopened and they're calling their employees back, that is the point when the expanded unemployment would end. You can't simply just say, no, I would rather continue collecting the extra $600 per week and not go back to work. If you can return to work, you have to go back. You have to go back to work. Otherwise, you cannot. Your eligibility for the expanded unemployment will end at that point. And these benefits are provided like any other unemployment benefits through the state's UI office. Next slide, please. Now, as I said, most of the CARES Act, and particularly the parts that we are most focused on, have to do with the assistance being provided to employers. The bill has made changes to the law that impact all employers. There are specific programs being set up for larger and mid-sized employers, but the most significant changes that are being created by the CARES Act have to do with new programs created for small businesses, as well as enhancing existing programs for small businesses. Next page, please. Or next slide, please. So, as I said, the bill does have provisions that apply to businesses at large, and the first of those changes have to do with some temporary changes being made to the U.S. tax code. The most significant of these is that under the CARES Act, businesses are permitted to delay payment of the employer portion of payroll taxes. That's the 6.2% per employee that businesses pay to fund Social Security. They may delay that payment between now and January 1st of 2021. It is a delayed payment so that the business will eventually have to pay it, but the business will not have to pay the first half of what they delay until December 31st of 2021. The remaining half will not come due until December 31st of 2022. The policy goal here is to help businesses with their liquidity and cash on hand so that they have the money available to pay their obligations and continue paying their employees during the course of the duration of the crisis. There is an intersection with this and the Paycheck Protection Program that I'm going to talk about momentarily. If a business elects to delay payment of the employer portion of payroll taxes, they can now also request to have loans forgiven under the Paycheck Protection Program. Additionally, under the CARES Act, the CARES Act allows businesses to now carry back for 5 years net operating losses for 2018, 19, and 2020. It allows businesses to accelerate recovery of AMT credits, and then it restores the qualified improvement property provision, which was inadvertently eliminated by the 2017 tax law. Now businesses can recoup expenses that they've paid to improve their property. This is something that a lot of restaurants and retail establishments will likely take advantage of. Next slide, please. One of the new tax provisions that was created by the CARES Act is what's being called the Employee Retention Tax Credit. What this is, it is a tax credit intended to help employers who have shut down or partially shut down or who have seen a 50% drop in gross receipts. It's intended to help them continue paying their employees during the crisis. It is a refundable tax credit for 50% of wages paid by the employer up to $10,000 per employee. So it is, as you know, think of it as it's up to a $5,000 tax credit. There is a restriction. There are a couple of restrictions being placed on this tax credit. For employers with more than 100 employees, this will only apply to the employees that are not currently providing services, but you continue to pay. So if you have employees who are working remotely or who are essential and still coming into work, you cannot claim this tax credit on those employees. You can only claim it on the employees who are currently not working, but yet you are still paying them. However, for employers with 100 or fewer employees, you can claim this tax credit on all of your employees. You can claim it on the ones who are not working at all, yet you're still paying them, or you can claim it on, and you can claim it on those who are working remotely, or who are essential and still coming into work. Now, again, there is a restriction being placed on this in that you cannot claim this tax credit and also receive Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiveness. Additionally, because the goal here is to make sure that businesses can pay their employees during the crisis, Treasury is going to issue guidance to allow for an advance payment of the credit so that you don't have to wait until you file your taxes to obtain the tax credit. Next slide, please. The provision of the CARES Act that is targeted at larger and mid-sized employers is a loan guarantee and Federal Reserve credit facility provision. The bill provides $500 billion for these loan guarantees. $46 billion of it is carved out for the airlines and national security businesses. However, $450 billion of this is reserved for businesses at large. Treasury and the Federal Reserve are still working out the details of how they are going to administer this program. Just last week, the Federal Reserve rolled out the rule for what they are referring to as the Main Street Lending Program. This is a program that's going to essentially guarantee loans issued by private and commercial banks that will have preferential terms. But there will be restrictions placed on those loans prohibiting stock buybacks while the loans are pending and plus 1 year after the loan is paid off, as well as limits on executive compensation for businesses that take out these loans. Additionally, part of the program will allow the Federal Reserve to buy up a number of the paycheck protection loans that are being issued by banks for small businesses to help those banks continue issuing paycheck protection loans. The rule for the Main Street Lending Program is still in. I think actually the comment period was a 5-day comment period. It just ended, I believe, yesterday. So we're expecting to get a little more detail on how the Fed and Treasury will administer these loans. But basically, these are targeted at mid-size and larger employers. Next slide, please. So the most significant program that's created under the CARES Act for small businesses is the Paycheck Protection Program. The bill provided $349 billion to provide loans to small businesses, 501c3 nonprofits, the self-employed, sole proprietors, and independent contractors. It also makes an exception for restaurants and hotels that are part of national chains. Typically, SBA rules would look at restaurants and hotels that are part of national chains as national organizations. For the purposes of the Paycheck Protection Program, it is going to look at restaurants and hotels on a per location basis. That way they should, for the most part, fall under that 500 or fewer employee threshold to make them eligible for Paycheck Protection Program loans. These loans are loans for 2.5 months of average payroll up to $10 million. They are loans that are backed up by the federal government, but they're issued by local and national banks. Furthermore, the requirements to obtain these loans are very minimal. No collateral will be required, and no personal guarantee will be required. But what the key feature of these loans is that they convert to grants equal to the amount spent on payroll, rent, interest on mortgage, utilities for the 8-week period after origination. There are a couple requirements. 75% of the amount of that loan has to be spent on payroll. Additionally, loan forgiveness will be reduced proportionally if the employer has reduced the number of FTEs. So if you have 10 employees and your head count goes down by 1, your loan forgiveness would be reduced by 10%. Additionally, the average payroll calculation is based on salaries up to $100,000 annually. So if you have when you're calculating your annual payroll or average payroll, you can only count the first $100,000 of each of your employees' salaries. Now, with respect to the reduction in loan forgiveness, if you've let employees go, Congress recognizes that a lot of businesses had to make a number of very quick business decisions as this crisis unfolded, and likely laid off employees prior to the creation of the Paycheck Protection Program. For that reason, the law is allowing you to bring employees back on staff and restore salary by June 30th, and you can avoid any reduction in the amount of loan forgiveness. So under guidance issued by the SBA, any employee that was let go between February 15th and April 26th, if you bring those employees back on, and by bring them back on, I mean restore headcount, and then restore payroll by June 30th, you can avoid any reduction in loan forgiveness. Again, the purpose or the policy objective of this program, as with most of the other programs under the CARES Act, is to enable businesses to keep paying their employees. So it does not matter if you have been deemed a non-essential business and you're effectively closed or not doing much business at all. The goal here is to get money into your hands so that you can continue paying your employees until we get to the other side of the crisis. Next slide, please. So I recognize that is a lot of information. You probably have a lot of questions. We have developed a 4-page guide to walk you through what types of businesses are eligible for this program, what types of things you need to do in order to calculate your average payroll, in order to determine the amount of money that you need to request in a loan, what types of things lenders are going to ask for, and then what types of things you need to make sure you're using the money for so that you can get loan forgiveness at the end of 8 weeks. You can download this document on our website, uschamber.com/SB loans. I've also distributed it to all of the local chambers in Oregon, and I believe Deanna has it on your website. The other thing I want to specify as well is that while most of the loan will convert to a grant if you spend it on payroll and interest on mortgages, utilities, and rent, if you spend money on other items, that will convert to a normal loan. The terms of the amount of the money that would convert to a loan are, it's a 2-year loan, payments are deferred for 6 weeks, and the rate of interest will be 1%. But if you're spending 75% of the amount of the money on payroll and then the remaining 25% on, again, interest on mortgages, rent, and utilities, then most, if not all, of the loan will convert to a grant, which you do not have to pay back. Next slide, please. The other program that is targeted towards small businesses is the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. This is actually a program that has been around for 60 years. It is a program that small businesses frequently take advantage of when they need capital to recover from things like a hurricane, a tornado, an earthquake, or other natural disaster. Under the program, businesses can request up to $2 million in working capital on a 30-year term at 3.75% interest, 2.75% for nonprofits. However, as I said, this is a program that was put in place 6 years ago. It is a program that is utilized to recover from disasters. It was not set up to respond to a crisis of the magnitude we are currently experiencing. Congress in the CARES Act did provide additional funding for this program. They have made eligibility to obtain these loans much easier. As you can see on the slide, loans will be based on credit scores. No tax returns are required. You can get up to $200,000 without a personal guarantee. They're not requiring collateral for loans of less than $25,000 or less. However, SBA has looked at the amount of money that is currently available, and they've looked at the number of loan requests they are getting for these loans, and they did the math, and right now, based on current funding levels, they're capping the maximum amount of money that they can put out at $25,000. Of that amount, $10,000 can be up to $10,000 can be provided in an emergency grant to businesses when they apply for the loan. This is a grant that does not have to be repaid, even if the underlying loan is not approved. But again, SBA is looking at current funding levels, and they are only providing up to $10,000 in the emergency grant. And based on guidance that they have issued to the SBA regional offices, they are providing these grants on a per employee basis. So if you have 5 employees and you've requested the emergency grant, they're providing $5,000. And then you will be eligible for up to $15,000 in an SBA EIDL loan. We are working to get more money put into this program so that SBA can distribute more money for emergency grants, as well as additional money in loans. But our priority here is to get more money for the Paycheck Protection Program, because the Paycheck Protection Program is really the program that's set up to help businesses continue paying their employees. The SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, businesses can use that money to pay their employees and to pay a lot of the same things that PPP loans pay for. However, it was never set up to help businesses in that way. And additionally, if you get both an SBA EIDL payment and then a Paycheck Protection Program loan, you cannot use the money you get from SBA for the same thing that you're using the money you're getting from the Paycheck Protection Program loan. Additionally, if you get an SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan emergency grant, any amount that you get in that EIDL grant would be subtracted from loan forgiveness under the Paycheck Protection Program loan. So those are some things you should keep in mind. You can definitely get both, but just understand that right now, under current funding levels, the amount of money that you can get under an EIDL is going to be significantly restricted, and Congress would prefer a lot of businesses looking to the PPP loan program to get money that they use to pay their employees. Next slide, please. Now, just quickly, I want to talk about the paid sick and family medical leave provisions of the Phase 2 bill. Under the Phase 2 bill, Congress is requiring employers with fewer than 500 employees to provide 10 days of sick leave if the leave is related to COVID-19. The sick leave can be taken when the employee is ill, quarantined due to exposure, or to take care of a sick or quarantined family member, or to take care of a child during a school closure. That leave will be paid to the employee at their regular rate of pay, up to a maximum of $511 per day if the employee is just taking care of themselves. If the employee is taking the paid sick leave to take care of a family member, that leave will be paid at 2/3 the rate of their normal pay, up to a maximum of $200 per day. Because this is a mandate on the business to pay employees to be who are out sick, the federal government is going to fully reimburse the business for paying the paid sick leave through a refundable tax credit. And again, because it's being refunded through a tax credit, Treasury is going to issue guidance on how a business can obtain an advance on payment of that tax credit, so they have the money now and can use it to pay their employees. Additionally, this leave is on top of any other leave that the employer already provides, and there is a narrow exception being provided to businesses with fewer than 50 employees, if the employee is taking the leave to care for a child who's out because their school or daycare closed, and if providing the leave would threaten the viability of the business. That is the only exception, as well as this leave would not be available, obviously, if the employee can otherwise work remotely or telework. Next slide, please. And then similarly, in addition to the sick leave provided by the Phase 2 bill, the Phase 2 bill also requires employers with fewer than 500 employees to provide paid family and medical leave up to 10 weeks, but only if the leave is being taken by the employee to care for a child whose school or childcare is closed due to COVID-19. That is the only reason that an employee can claim the paid family medical leave under the Phase 2 bill. The leave will be paid at 2/3 regular rate of pay, up to a maximum of $200 per day and $10,000 in the aggregate. It is like with the sick leave, it is in addition to any leave already provided by the employer, and it is being fully reimbursed by the federal government through a refundable tax credit, which we expect Treasury to provide guidance on how the employer can obtain an advance to get that money now and continue paying their employees. And additionally, there is a similar narrow exception for businesses with fewer than 50 employees if providing the leave would threaten the viability of the business. And then the leave is obviously not available if the employee has the ability to otherwise telework or work remotely. Next slide, please. So again, that is an awful lot of information I've just run through very quickly. As I mentioned, the Paycheck Protection Program is the provision of the CARES Act that is really being targeted towards small businesses. It is the most money that is being laid out for small businesses is provided to the Paycheck Protection Program. I'm sure you've all been watching the news and you're hearing that this money is going out the door very quickly. As of Friday, there were over 660,000 loans in the pipeline, and over $168 billion that those loans would see go out the door. I saw on the news last night that number is actually now over $200 billion in loans that are in the pipeline. So clearly, the program funding is becoming a concern. And at the current rate that the loans are being issued, it's likely that the program will run out of money, conservatively speaking, by the end of April. But we are seeing estimates that it could run out of money as early as next week. So we are working to get Congress to add an additional $251 billion into the program. There is bipartisan support to add that money. However, there is a little bit of a disagreement about what else should be included in that bill. We fully expect that Congress will provide additional funding. It's just right now a question of when they will provide that additional funding. Furthermore, as part of that funding bill, there is a request to add additional funding for the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. However, as I said, the emphasis is being placed on the Paycheck Protection Program because that is the program that was specifically set up to enable businesses to continue providing payments to their employees during the duration of the crisis. We are putting out documents to help businesses better understand all of these programs. As I mentioned earlier, we've already developed a guide and checklist on the Paycheck Protection Program. We also have a similar document on the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, another document on the Employee Retention Tax Credit. We have guides on the paycheck or on the paid sick and family medical leave provisions of the Phase 2 bill. And we will, once we get more information from the Department of Treasury and Federal Reserve on the Main Street Lending Program, as well as the other lending programs that are being set up for larger and mid-sized businesses, we will be developing similar guidance for businesses on those. I am going to continue providing all of that information to the local chambers so that they can distribute that information to you all and the rest of their members. But you can keep up with what we're putting out on our website, uschamber.com. We also have a small business website, uschamber.com/co, where we're also posting these documents, as well as a number of other documents giving you best practices for what you need to be doing if you are remaining in operation during the crisis, as well as other things you should be taking into consideration as we start to move to reopen businesses once we get past this crisis. And with that, Deanna, I'm happy to take any questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was a lot of information. So at this point, if you have a question, just wave your hand and I will unmute you and you can ask your question. Is there anybody that has a question at this point? Oh, come on. So I will ask a couple of questions. Chris, as you know, the PPP did not include 501c6s, which, oh, by the way, a Chamber of Commerce is a 501c6, as are all business organizations that have membership of any type. So big deal for chambers of commerce and other business organizations trying to support our members and the business community at large. What are chances that 501c6s will be included in the next round of the PPP?
So this is something this is very much a priority for the U.S. Chamber to get this oversight corrected. It was something that was being negotiated up until the very end of the CARES Act, and for some reason, C6s were not made eligible for PPP loans. There is no consistent reason that we've been given why C6s are not included, but based on the amount of pressure that members of Congress are getting from chambers of commerce and other nonprofit associations that are affected by this, we expect that this will be addressed at some point. It's just a question of when and how. My advice to local chambers of commerce is, we will keep pushing this. We sent a letter to Capitol Hill during the CARES Act negotiations with over 1,500 chambers of commerce signed onto that letter, emphasizing the need to allow chambers to get access to PPP loans. However, it really will be helpful if local chambers also, through their executive directors and CEOs, as well as their members, continue putting pressure on Congress to make this change. We don't expect that. So right now, as I mentioned, Congress is trying to add additional funding for the PPP and the EIDL. This is kind of viewed as CARES Act .2. It is not considered the phase 4 bill that you're seeing talked about a lot in the press. The most likely chance to get the C6 issue addressed will be in the phase 4 bill. That being said, if there is an opportunity to get this attached to the funding bill that Congress is currently looking at doing, we welcome that and we will take that opportunity. The thing is, because Congress is not in DC right now, members do not want to go back and gather in large groups. Everything that Congress is doing has to be done through what's called unanimous consent in the Senate and in the House of Representatives by voice vote, because they don't all want to be in the same place and do a recorded vote. Because of that, they have to make sure there are no one just shows up and objects to moving these bills by voice vote and unanimous consent. And so we are trying to avoid putting too many requests on this CARES Act, this supplemental CARES Act, that would cause someone to show up and object to it. So again, we will happily take any opportunity to get this addressed sooner, but the most likely opportunity to get this addressed will be in the phase 4 bill.
Thank you. I've also heard from nonprofit organizations. We do now a weekly nonprofit conversation. They were feeling a bit like they weren't a focus. So we now have a weekly call with them. And we have a nonprofit that locally provides great service and great support. It's completely volunteer. So they have no opportunity for, any of the PPP. They don't have employees. Right. Yeah. And they don't have, the EIDL is not, applicable to them. So they're basically just having to almost dissolve because they don't have any funding at all and no ability to fundraise.
Right.
Any solutions for them?
Not right now. Yeah, because like you said, the PPP is based on your average payroll, and if you're all volunteer,
right,
it doesn't. You can't really get anything out of it. So, these programs aren't going to really help them.
Right. So, in looking at the phase 4, let's say that they've increased funding for the PPP and for the EIDL. So if we look at phase 4, what kind of elements will be included in there that maybe, have completely been a gap or not addressed in the other prior CARES Act?
So, that's the $1 million question. There isn't
$1 million, I think.
Yeah, there really isn't, any consensus on what will go into that bill. A lot of people are saying, look to what Speaker Pelosi rolled out as their starting point for the negotiations. But, really, I think right now the focus is on getting the phase 3 bill implemented and getting it right and making sure that these programs are getting the money to the people it needs to get to. And then if there needs to be any kind of legislative fixes to that, those would be things that would be dealt with in the phase 4 bill. Things like the C6 issue would be dealt with in the phase 4 bill. And there's also a lot of discussion around infrastructure funding. But it really is hard to say. And, there's a real logistical challenge here because the more complicated that bill gets, the more likely it is you're going to see members wanting to offer amendments, wanting recorded votes, and it's going to be that much more difficult to move a bill until Congress is physically back in DC. And yesterday, the House of Representatives announced that they're not planning to come back to DC until May 4th. So, to answer the question, like, no one really knows right now. There's a lot of things on the table, and it's hard to say how many of those would actually be realistic.
I have a suggestion. There was the National Main Street Association did a big survey of all of their member organizations, and they came up with, I think it was over 5,000 small businesses that actually participated in the survey. And basically it said, a huge majority of Main Street America will go away in 2 months unless we have the ability to help and assist them. And so all of this, wrangling and political maneuvering of Congress is really putting, putting a target right on the back of Main Street America. And they only have 2 months of and that's at the best case of savings. And so at some point in time, they're going to eventually potentially go away if Congress can't move in an expedient fashion.
Right. And, we've done similar surveys of our members, and, it's 1 in 4 businesses saying that, they have maybe a month before they go out of business permanently.
So I guess that I'm not sure how much more of an impetus that can be on fast moving urgency, but I'm a skeptic about what a sense of urgency Congress might look like. And I think that certainly the CARES Act was Herculean work that they did to get that done. But now, it almost feels like it's like, okay, we've done that. Now we need to get back to, the real way that we get things done, which is political negotiation that drags on for months at a time. And we just don't frankly have that. And I'm not sure, we've spoken with our Congresswoman yesterday, and she's quite clear in the fact that, we need to move quickly, and but yet there just seems to be sort of this, I guess, a settling down a bit, and that they feel like they've funded an enormous amount, and now they're just waiting to see the impact of that, but there's chaos behind the funding.
Right. And, I don't want to leave you with the wrong impression. We agree with you that, time is of the essence. We need to move quickly. And, that is why with at least these additional funding requests, we're not trying to bog it down with other requests. We, the priority is making sure these programs are funded. Then we can turn to what we do next. But we agree. Congress cannot dither around here. They need to make sure these programs are well funded and working correctly.
Right. And I guess I'm just wondering, and certainly if anybody else has a question, don't let me just run rampant over top of you. Just raise your hand and I'm happy to call on you. Yes, Henry, you have a question.
Yeah, I just wanted some clarification on the paid sick leave. You talked about reimbursement to small business for allowing an additional 10 days of sick leave. You talked about that being possibly by tax credit, or do you think there would be a check? I mean, small businesses are hurting for funds right now. So,
right. Right. And, it is through a tax credit, and, under normal circumstances with a tax credit, you can't get that until you file your taxes. Treasury is looking to figure out a way to provide businesses an advance payment on that tax credit. I don't think they've released the details of that yet, but they recognize that you can't pay the paid sick leave if you don't have the money. So they're looking for ways, like I said, to advance payment of that tax credit so that you can get the money sooner and use it to pay the employees.
Okay.
Other questions, folks? So I saw that that the U.S. Chamber is pulling together a group and has started doing some contemplation of I think it's called Path Forward, which is coming out and into the recovery. Any information about what that might look like and what the U.S. Chamber is working on?
So it is very much in the early stages of the conversation, but we were in our conversations with our members, both our businesses and corporate members, as well as our trade association and state and local chamber members. The way we go back to business is going to be difficult. It isn't simply flip a switch and everyone shows back up to work. It is likely going to be something that is done in phases, and we want to see that it's done methodically and done safely, both for businesses and their employees. And we don't want it to be done in kind of a hodgepodge, state by state way. Our goal here is to provide some best practices and some guidance for how this can be done more methodically and more, if not nationally, but maybe on a regional basis. There are also a lot of questions coming up around legal liability, both for businesses, for hospitals, things that, our members have concerns that they could be exposed to a lot of legal liability, if their employees come back and then they get sick, or, hospitals and, who are struggling to get the equipment that they need to provide treatment. And, maybe some of that equipment isn't necessarily, it may malfunction. What kind of liability would they be exposed to? There's going to be a lot of questions that arise from this crisis that may not have been at the forefront before this all came about. And we're trying to explore anything and everything that businesses need to be aware of in terms of restarting their operations, as well as what types of things that they need to be aware of in terms of protecting their employees, and then just what types of legal issues that are going to be out there that they need to be aware of as they restart operating.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions for Chris?
There are a couple questions in the comments.
Oh, thank you. The chat. So I think I answered most of them, didn't I?
Oh, unemployed, self-employed individuals are made eligible for unemployment under the Phase 2 bill.
And is that now that's happened?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent.
And I think we answered the other ones.
I think maybe the biggest question or the biggest concern that's been expressed regarding sole proprietors and independent contractors is that Oregon's unemployment system has never been set up for that,
right,
and that it's clunky. about trying to figure out how to set up forms and the ability for folks that haven't ever been eligible for unemployment to now all of a sudden be eligible for unemployment, and to make that system work for them. And evidently, Oregon's unemployment system is written in COBOL, which I haven't heard that word since, I don't know, many, many years. So that also just speaks to an infrastructure issue that we have. Olga, was that your question about that? And did that answer that question for you?
Yeah, that's mine. I was able to take advantage of unemployment insurance when I first started my business, because there is a provision for when you go from working for someone else to being self-employed. There is a program for someone starting out to be like, there's a separate department that helps with you set up your own business. But once you're an established business, that's never been a provision.
Right. So it's different now. It's, I think, yeah, a sole proprietor and independent contractors do qualify. And there is the additional $600 per week that's being added to anyone who's on unemployment right now, a compensation that happens. So that's good news for folks that, you know, we're looking at unemployment as being a real reduction in their income. So maybe that will be helpful. And I think also, I heard correctly, the checks coming out to individuals and to joint filers will happen very quickly, or it's happening now. And like you said, it's by income level. So those that are in most need are first to the list. And so others will trickle out over the next couple of weeks or so. So that's good news.
And additionally, you know, sole proprietors and self-employed, they can also apply for Paycheck Protection Program loans.
And that's counting them as their only employee, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And there was a question about if you take an actual salary or if you take, you know, sort of net from your business, in what way you do it depends on how if you are considered an employee or if you're considered more of a shareholder.
Right. And, you know, that is something that, you know, again, there isn't much guidance out there on, you know, and the advice there is work with your banker on that one, and in terms of determining what your average payroll would be and how much you need to request for the loan.
Well, and I do think that, you know, local banks are overwrought right now with a lot going on, but they have been, you know, as helpful as possible. I know that they're also looking at some other kinds of, you know, sort of tech fin types of businesses that are now opening up and being allowed to participate in helping qualify those applications, which is great because the more it's really about capacity. And, you know, it's not like you have banks that are like, oh, I'm not interested in new customers. It's just the absolute, you know, deluge of requests that came in, that just gave them a base to work with that they already had information about. But there were a lot of folks that haven't been, you know, attached to a traditional banking institution that just had nowhere to go.
Right. And, you know, one of the things to keep in mind, or 2 points, a lot of the non-traditional lenders, the fintechs type lenders, those are coming online this week. And so we expect to see those institutions able to issue some more loans. And then we get a lot of questions about why doesn't the government just lend the money out themselves? And the reason they're working this through the banks is because the banks actually have the infrastructure in place to start lending money. Because of how fast Congress wanted to get this program up and running, there simply wasn't enough time to create an entirely new direct loan program where the Treasury would be issuing direct loans. So that is why they are basically guaranteeing loans through banks and then eventually going to just buy up those loans from the banks rather than creating an entirely separate government direct loan program.
Excellent. All right, folks, any final questions while we have Chris on the line with us? Chris, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you guys are really busy and you're being asked to, you know, explain this around town quite a number of times, but truly appreciate it. And I, you know, look forward to having you back as phase 4 comes out and we can learn more information about that.
Thank you, Deanna.
Excellent. Thank you all for joining us. And remember, tomorrow's program is on maintaining your customer loyalty while your doors are closed. And that's Elizabeth Case with Yellow Dog Consulting. If you haven't signed up, you can do that on our website directly. So have a great rest of your day. Thank you.